Turn, if you would, to number 475 in our hymnals, and we will read in unison from the Charter of the United Nations, We the Peoples of the United Nations. We begin. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom, and for these ends to practice tolerance and to live together in peace as good neighbors, to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, to ensure that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest, to employ international machinery in the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all people, have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims. And together we'll sing our first hymn, For the Earth Forever Turning, number 163.
For
and we join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. So be it. Good morning. Oh, do it again. Good morning. You get what you ask for. Welcome. I want everyone to feel welcomed. If you've been here forever, if you slept here last night and the night before, I want you to feel welcomed. If you're here for the very first time today, it's good to be together. You know how people sometimes have quotes at the bottoms of their emails? Today I got one that had the quote from Theodore Roethke, and it says, "What we need is more people who specialize in the impossible." Frankly, I think we need fewer people who specialize in the impossible, because this has just been an extraordinary week, and today is also extraordinary. In particular, I want to welcome Bruce Knotts, the Executive Director of the Unitarian Universalist United Nations Office, and he will be further introduced a little later, and we are glad to have you with us, Bruce. He got up at 3 o'clock this morning in New York City after having taken a train from Bethesda, Maryland, to get to New York City in order to fly here this morning, and boy, are his arms tired. Oh, there was a haunted house here, and it was just extraordinary, and I want to begin by thanking the haunted house team led by Carl Winkler, but including Cynthia and Karen and Bea and Peter Waskoff and Ira Perlow and all of the amazing actors and behind-the-scenes personnel. Give it up for all of them. And seeing as you're so enthusiastic, please come back here at 2 o'clock to help break the darn thing down. And Carl needs some help from all of you. That astonishing haunted house raised $11,500. We joined the 21st century with the ability to accept credit cards. We raised $1,000 in pre-event ticket sales. We had 100 families visit us for the trick-or-treat Saturday day. 500 people were here last night. There were 1,000 people that passed through the building in 2 days. People were willing to wait up to an hour to go through the haunted house. And next year's theme for the First Parish Haunted House will be Mary Shelley. Mark your calendars, October 19th and 20th. Unbelievable. And that was after a packed house was here Thursday evening for the poet laureate Billy Collins. Let's see. Other things. Kath Van Prague is heading up our auction this year. This is the last week for people to make a submission to the auction, and we'd love to have everyone contribute somehow. Click on the auction link at our website for more information and to make a donation. And some of you had been planning to go with us to court on Tuesday for the hearing on our lawsuit relative to solar panels and the town of Bedford. That hearing has been postponed, and so we can all go to court together when we have the rescheduled date. Stay tuned for that. Please note other things that are in the back of the order of service, including the True Story Theater that will be with us on Wednesday. And I think I've taken up enough time doing this as it is. You know, Bruce, before the kids go, I want you to say a little bit to them, and you have something you're going to read to them, so why don't you come on over to the aisle. This is Bruce Knotts.
Hi. So I'm going to read to you a book from UNICEF. This is sort of a child's version of the International Convention on the Rights of the Child. Probably most of you know that almost every country on the face of the earth has signed and ratified this convention, with the exceptions of Somalia, South Sudan, and the United States. So, whoever you are, wherever we live, these rights belong to all children under the sun, the moon, and the stars, whether we live in cities, towns, or villages, or in mountains, or valleys, or deserts, or forests, or jungles. Anywhere and everywhere in the big wide world, these are the rights of the child. There's a nice picture there. Understand that all children are precious. Pick us up if we fall down, and if we are lost, lend us your hand. Give us the things we need to make us happy and strong, and always do your best for us wherever we are in your care. Picture there. All children should be allowed to live and grow and grow and grow until they are grown up and can decide things for themselves. Max, Zara, Betty, Juan, Suyan, Raza, Paulo, Yar, Yoko, and Muhammad. Every one of us shall have a name and a land to call our own. Keep our families together, and if we have no family, look after us and love us just the same. Allow us to tell you what we are thinking or feeling, whether our voices are big or small, or whether we whisper or shout or paint, draw, mime, or sign it. Listen to us and hear what we have to say. No one on earth has the right to hurt us, not even our moms and dads. Protect us always from anyone who would be cruel. If we are disabled, either in body or in mind, treasure us especially and give us the care we need to live happily in the world. Watch over us, wrap us up against the cold and rain, give us the shade from the hot sun, make sure we have enough to eat and drink, and if we are sick, nurse and comfort us. Teach us all to read and write, and teach us well so we can grow up to be the best we can be in whatever we wish to do. Take care of our earth, the flowers, the trees, the rivers, the seas, and teach us how to care for it in our turn. All children shall have time to play and time to rest when we are tired. Playtime and rest time. In times of war, do not make us part of any battle, but shelter us and protect us from all harm. Allow us to say our own prayers in our own words, whether we are in churches or temples, synagogues or mosques, chapels or shrines, or any other place a prayer might be said to our own God, and let us sing and dance and dress in the ways of our own people. Do your best to let everyone know that wherever we are, whoever we are, wherever we live, these are the rights of every child. Let it be. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. And kids and teachers are going to go off to their in-gathering now, and as they do, we're going to sing the sanctuary song. The words are in your order of service. and a late-breaking addition to our order of service, Brown Pulliam with a climate justice moment.
Thank you, John. I'm looking for volunteers to go outside your comfort zone. Having come to activism after half of my life was already over, I can tell you a few things about going outside my comfort zone. One downside is that I seldom have seen any measurable evidence that it had done much good. That doesn't matter. I am here to affirm that the world outside this building needs you. When you ring a stranger's doorbell, stand alone on a street corner holding a sign, or travel hundreds of miles to march for a cause, there will be little victories. It does feel good when that stranger says, yes, he'll sign the petition, or honks and gives you a thumbs up for your sign. But the most important value is that going outside your comfort zone usually enlarges that zone. Our denominational activism branch, UU Mass Action, has taken responsibility to help organize a campaign to get Governor Baker to walk his talk of supporting the Paris Environmental Accords. This involves for us to take the Red Line to Park Place T stop, walking one long block up Beacon Hill to the State House, then standing in the corridor outside the governor's office for about 45 minutes, ending at 1 p.m. You will be in good company. See us this morning in the common room and find out how you can help us and our environment.
If you'll turn in your hymnal to number 584, we'll do this as a responsive reading. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted.
Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that.
We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation.
The foundation of such a method is love.
Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war.
One day we must come to see that peace is not merely the distant goal that we seek, but the means by which we arrive at that goal.
We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means.
We shall hew out the moment of despair, a stone of hope.
Freely we have received, freely may we give. Our morning's offering will now be gratefully received.
Good morning. It is indeed a privilege to have Bruce Knotts, the director of our UU United Nations office, as our guest this morning to celebrate UN Sunday. And it is my personal pleasure to introduce him. Bruce and I became acquainted last year when I began pestering his office to generate UUA support for the effort at the UN to create an international ban on nuclear weapons. When I contacted his office, I learned two things. First, Bruce and the UUA had been involved in very early efforts to promote this undertaking. And secondly, Bruce was not only welcoming, but enthusiastically supportive of my interest. That began a process of my own learning a great deal more about the UN, the role of the UUA office there, and appreciation of their work. When Bruce describes some of what they do in his remarks this morning, I think you'll understand why. Now, long before Bruce became director of the UUNO office in 2008, he had an international career both in the private sector and as a U.S. diplomat. That work began as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ethiopia, then working for Raytheon in Saudi Arabia and the World Bank in Somalia. That's a nice juxtaposition. And then joining the State Department in 1984. Bruce's diplomatic assignments included Greece, Zambia, India, Pakistan, Kenya, Sudan. He obviously just couldn't keep a job. The Ivory Coast, where he served as the regional refugee coordinator for West Africa, and Gambia, where he was deputy chief of mission. After retiring from the Foreign Service in 2007, Bruce brought that same level of energy and professionalism to the UN United Nations office. In addition to leading the many activities of the UUNO itself, Bruce has taken on significant responsibilities within the UN non-governmental organizations, or NGO sector. He is chair of the NGO Committee on Human Rights, the chair of the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace and Security, serves on several other committees and working groups, and is chair of the NGO Executive Committee, which represents 1,400 NGOs at the UN. Bruce is frequently invited to speak at venues around the world, including recent presentations in Canada, Mexico, China, Republic of Korea, Ghana, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam, and Bedford. Phew. Let's welcome Bruce Knotts.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me to your lovely historic congregation and for your welcoming hospitality. I'm just back from Taiwan, where I attended a Buddhist retreat with my Dharma master, Chen Yen, who is an 81-year-old woman leading the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation for the past 52 years. It is rare for a woman to lead a Buddhist order, and Master Chen Yen reminds me a great deal of Mother Teresa, whom I got to know when I was posted at the American Consul General in Calcutta, India, in the late 1980s. Master Chen Yen said, "You can learn all there is to learn about Buddhism, but if you don't put it into action, you really don't know Buddhism." We can say the same about Unitarian Universalism. It's like saying you've read a lot of books about how to drive a car, but never driven one. Can you really claim to know how to drive a car when you've never driven one? Can you ever really say you know how to be a Unitarian Universalist when you've never put your faith to the test in action? I want to thank all of you for joining hands with us in our work to create beloved community around this precious planet of ours. We have no planet B. We have to protect and cherish each other and this planet, our only home. The Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation works closely with the UUNO on ethical eating. The ethical eating resolution was passed by the UUA General Assembly in 2011, which recommends eating a vegetarian diet or at least reduce meat consumption to a minimum. The United Nations agrees that animal agriculture represents about 51% of total carbon emissions. You can stop driving your car and turn off all your lights, and you won't nearly have the impact on the climate as you would by reducing or eliminating your meat consumption. The UUNO and the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation call for people to give this a try and not consume any meat or fish on January 11th. We call it the 111 campaign. Your Unitarian Universalist United Nations office brings our Unitarian Universalist values to the global work of the United Nations every day. So what do we advocate at the United Nations? We advocate for a better world, the beloved community, and of a nation of which we can be proud. For years, the premier economic forum takes place at Davos, Switzerland. This is where American and political business and business leaders tend to dominate. That was not the case this year. It was Chinese President Xi and Chinese web marketing giant Jack Ma of Alibaba who were the stars of the show. Jack Ma was asked about the U.S. economy in relation to China, since Donald Trump had been talking about imposing tariffs on Chinese imports. Jack Ma said blaming China for any economic issues in the U.S. was misguided. If America is looking to blame someone, Ma said, it should blame itself. It's not that other nations steal jobs from you guys. It's your strategy, Ma said. He went on to say that the USA should distribute the money and things in a proper way. He said the U.S. wasted over $14 trillion in fighting wars over the past 30 years rather than investing in infrastructure at home. Ma said this was the reason America's economic growth had weakened, not China's supposed theft of jobs. In fact, Ma called outsourcing wonderful and perfect strategy. American multinational companies made millions and millions of dollars from globalization, Ma said. The past 30 years, IBM, Cisco, Microsoft have made tens of millions. The profits they've made are much more than the 4 Chinese banks put together. But where did the money go? He said the U.S. is not distributing or investing its money properly, and that's why many people in the country feel racked with economic anxiety. He said too much money flows to Wall Street and Silicon Valley. Instead, the country should be helping the Midwest and Americans, not good in schooling too, Ma went on to say. You're supposed to spend money on your own people. Along those lines, Ma stressed that globalization is a good thing, but it too should be inclusive, with the spoils not just going to the wealthy few. The world needs new leadership, but the new leadership is about working together, Ma said. It's as a business person, I want the world to share prosperity together. I've been to China, and I was amazed by what China has done in the past 30 years, taking the country from abysmal poverty to becoming a first-rate economic power. Modern buildings, world-class airports, highways, and infrastructure. Probably the most impressive for me was the extensive high-speed rail system with gleaming, clean, well-functioning train stations. I compare this with our country and its filthy and poorly run train stations, and nothing like the high-speed rail that I saw in China and in Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and Europe. Healthcare and education are provided to all citizens in China and in most of the world's developed countries and developing countries. 74% of global poverty reduction has taken place in China. China is not perfect, and I certainly deplore many of its human rights violations, as I do American human rights violations. President Obama initiated a $1 trillion modernization of our nuclear arsenal, for which President Trump takes credit. This $1 trillion expenditure will get us an enhanced nuclear arsenal, which will tempt Donald Trump or some future president to use, ending life on this planet. With our vast wealth, we are purchasing our own destruction. On July 7, 2017, countries met at the United Nations in New York to adopt a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, the first multilateral legally binding instrument for nuclear disarmament to have taken place for the last 20 years. The UNO added its powerful voice to others in civil society to make this a reality. The treaty represents an important step and a contribution towards the common aspirations of a world without nuclear weapons, a spokesperson for Secretary General Antonio Guterres said. The treaty, adopted by a vote of 122 countries in favor to 1 against, the Netherlands, 1 abstention, Singapore, prohibits the full range of nuclear weapon-related activities such as undertaking to develop, test, produce, manufacture, acquire, possess, or stockpile nuclear weapons or any other nuclear explosive devices, as well as to use the threat of their use as weapons. Ambassador Eileen White Gomez of Costa Rica, who served as the president of the conference that negotiated the treaty, said, quote, "I feel emotional because we are responding to the hopes and dreams of the present and future generations. The world is one step closer to a total elimination of nuclear weapons." However, a number of countries stayed out of the negotiations, including the United States, Russia, China, the Democratic Republic of Korea, and other nuclear weapons states, as well as many of their allies. In a joint press statement, the delegations of the United States, United Kingdom, and France said, quote, they have not taken part in the negotiation of the treaty and do not intend to sign, ratify, or ever to become part of it. This treaty is important as a first step to be taken to abolish nuclear weapons in decades, and it's the first sign that the majority of the member states of the UN are tired of being pushed around by the nuclear weapons possessing states. I am, of course, delighted that our partner, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, has just been awarded the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize. This is a very well-deserved award and a strong statement by the Nobel Committee that it's long past time to abolish nuclear weapons. Let's take a moment to look at where we're not spending our money. According to Pew Research, the United States ranks 24th in science education, 39th in mathematics, and 24th in reading. We have crumbling infrastructure with bridges and other infrastructure falling apart. High-speed rail in the U.S. area is far below that of other developed and developing countries. As Jack Ma pointed out, we have spent $14 trillion in the wrong way to the detriment of our nation and its people. But why does it matter? Here's a story which might illuminate our subject. We were all transfixed by the Arab Spring, which began in Tunisia on December 17, 2010. The Tunisian revolution effect spread strongly to 5 other countries, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, and Iraq, where either the regime was toppled or major uprisings and social violence occurred, including civil wars and insurgencies. The wave of initial revolutions and protests faded by mid-2012. Many Arab Spring demonstrations were met by violent responses from authorities. Large-scale conflicts resulted. The Syrian civil war, Iraqi insurgency, the Egyptian crisis and coup, and the Libyan civil war and the Yemeni civil war. The Arab Spring brought hope to the entire region and ended in death and destruction everywhere except Tunisia. Why was Tunisia different? At a meeting I attended at the mission of Kazakhstan to the UN, the ambassador of Tunisia to the UN gave us his opinion. Tunisia's first president, Habib Bourguiba, who led his country from 1956 to 1987, created one of the first official human rights organizations in Africa. The country's defense expenditures accounted for only about 2% of the national budget, probably the smallest portion in the Arab world. Meanwhile, a remarkable high 49% of the budget was allotted to education and social services. The Tunisian ambassador to the UN said that when Western powers often sell fighter jets to Tunisia, Bourguiba asked how many schools he could build for the cost of one fighter jet. He cared more about building schools than acquiring fighter jets, which could only help the global military-industrial complex. At the Council on Foreign Relations, I learned that years before the Arab Spring, secular and religious leaders met repeatedly and finally, after a lot of negotiation, agreed on one principle: laws are made by citizens. With an emphasis on human rights, education, social services, and the primacy of citizens in making laws, Tunisia was prepared to move from authoritarian to democratic governance. Even in this country, there are those who think laws come from God, which gives near dictatorial power to those claiming to speak for God. However, when you subscribe to the concept that people make laws, democracy and accountable government wins. Tunisia successfully worked for years to prepare itself for the Arab Spring. For what are we preparing? With declining budgets for social services, diplomacy, and education, and the emphasis on the military and militarized police forces, what do you imagine the results will be? The United States is far outspent in public dollars by other developed nations. Taxes fund 36 cents out of every dollar spent on college and vocational training programs, while students and their families cover the rest. In other developed and developing countries, it's the reverse. Tax revenue covers 68 cents of every dollar for advanced training, and students and families pay the remaining 32 cents, so just the reverse. When people talk about other countries out-educating the United States, it needs to be remembered that those nations are out-investing in education as well. Overspending on armaments that we dare not use has the consequences for our future and our children. Remember that the war on poverty was set aside for the war in Vietnam. I spoke at the American Embassy in Hanoi in January this year. It was clear from my first visit to Vietnam that we never had any business fighting there. Even after the devastation we wrought in Vietnam, the people love Americans and hate the Chinese, whom they fought to keep out of their country for 2,000 years. We were just a blip. I remember when Sputnik, anybody remember Sputnik here? When Sputnik was launched in 1957 by the Soviet Union, it so scared the United States that we increased funding for education, especially in the areas of engineering and science. Since the Red Scare, we have replaced a motivating fear of the Soviet Union with arrogance. We are complacent and think dependence on our military superiority will protect our future. How many other empires have fallen with the same arrogance? The greatness of America has been its ability to build, innovate, manufacture, and produce like no other nation. The bedrock of our military victories has been our ability to rise to any occasion and outproduce and innovate our competitors. Are we still certain we have that competitive edge? I don't think so. I see other countries which are cleaner, better educated, with less poverty, better infrastructure, and better standards of life and health care than the United States. We cling to myths of having the highest standards of life in the world. The Social Progress Index collates the scores of three main areas: basic human needs, which includes medical care, sanitation, and shelter; foundations of well-being, which covers education, increases access to technology and life expectancy; and opportunity, which looks at personal rights, freedom of choice, and general tolerance. The USA ranks 19th behind nations in Europe, Asia, North America, New Zealand, and Australia. When all we have is our military legions and lack talent, economy, and productive capacity behind them, we are on our way to a speedy decline and fall. The UUNO played an important part in advocating for the ban on nuclear weapons, which was approved by the UN General Assembly. I lead the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace, and Security, which was founded by UUA International Office Director Reverend Homer Jack in 1970. His focus was on the elimination of nuclear weapons, a vision which we retain. However, as the Regional Refugee Coordinator for the U.S. government in West Africa from 2000 to 2003, I saw firsthand what small arms in nations like Sierra Leone and Liberia and in the cities of the United States can do. Small arms and larger conventional weapons are also weapons of mass destruction. My contribution to the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace, and Security has been to focus on conventional arms in addition to nuclear weapons. Our advocacy was successful in achieving the landmark Arms Trade Treaty, ATT, regulating the international trade in conventional arms from small arms to battle tanks, combat aircraft, and warships. The Arms Trade Treaty entered into force on December 24, 2014. We desperately need gun control laws in this country. Just when a mass shooting is declared the worst in American history, another comes along to replace it. The latest tragedy was in Las Vegas. There have been 1,500 mass shootings since Sandy Hook, and our Congress has done nothing. Our rate of firearm homicides is 6 times the rate of Canada and 16 times the rate of Germany. Having a firearm does not equal freedom, and it is not a measure of our masculinity. In Liberia and Sierra Leone, I saw how the spectacular wealth produced by extraordinarily rich deposits of diamonds, which could have been used to build schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, were squandered on lethal weapons and civil wars which decimated those two very beautiful and fertile countries. It disturbs me to see vast wealth with the potential to do so much good wasted on weapons and war, squandering the opportunities to create educated, healthy, and productive societies. Instead, the wealth was used to create misery, death, and destruction. Our office was given an advance copy to comment of The Internationalists, How a Radical Plan to Outlaw War Remade the World by Donna Hathaway and Scott Shapiro, which discusses the Paris Peace Pact of 1928, which has largely been ignored. The book, now on sale, documents how this pact put into motion the current world order, which has outlawed war, with penalties and disincentives to those that resort to war. Prior to this treaty, war was the legal way for sovereign states to obtain their just rights or collect debts from other nations. The doctrine and legal system of a just war was elaborate and detailed. Sovereign states also had absolute authority to do what they wanted with citizens within their territory. All that changed in 1928. However, when violations of the law of nations occurred in the next few years, the world had not yet developed alternatives to war to punish Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and military Japan. Today, we have an international system which, while faulty, provides alternatives to war and limits sovereignty of nations to violate human rights. This system is constantly tested, but it has worked since the founding of the UN with only one territorial acquisition by war, that of the Crimea by Russia. The sovereignty of nations to violate human rights, the human rights of their people, is being curtailed. On September 29, 2017, Belgium, Benin, Costa Rica, France, Mexico, Moldova, Mongolia, and Switzerland proposed a resolution to ban the death penalty for specific forms of conduct such as apostasy, blasphemy, adultery, and consensual same-sex relations. These nations denounce the use of the death penalty against persons with mental and intellectual disabilities, persons below 18 years of age at the time of the commission of the crime, and pregnant women, expressing serious concern that the application of the death penalty for adultery was disproportionately imposed on women. The resolution passed in a vote of 27 to 13. Those nations voting against were those nations typically unwilling to give up complete sovereignty within their borders. Those nations opposing the resolution were supported by Russia, which didn't actually have a vote, and the other voting members were Botswana, Burundi, Egypt, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, China, India, Iraq, Japan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and guess what? The United States. I hope you can all become internationalists and good global citizens, appreciating our own culture, political system, ethnicity, religion, and manners, and those of everyone else equally. Your Unitarian Universalist United Nations office works very effectively to promote human rights for everyone, everywhere, promote climate justice to sustain our planet, and to promote disarmament, peace, and security. We have been effective in representing our Unitarian Universalist values on the global stage at the United Nations for over 55 years. In that time, we founded Religions for Peace, helped establish the International Criminal Court, and established sexual orientation, gender identity, human rights in every aspect of the work of the United Nations. We are active and effective participants in the United Nations Climate Conference of Parties, such as the one of Paris in 2015 and several before and after that. We have special observer status in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We play leading roles in the non-governmental organizations, NGO committees in the United Nations, such as the NGO Committee on Sustainable Development, the NGO Committee on the Security Council, the NGO Committee on Education, the NGO Committee on Freedom of Religion or Belief, and we lead the NGO Committee on Human Rights, the NGO Department of Public Information Executive Committee representing 1,400 NGOs, and we founded and lead the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace, and Security. We mentor many interns every year and set them off on lives of service and impact. We enable orphan children to attend schools in Ghana with our Every Child is Our Child program. I will be visiting this project in early December and hope to organize a donor trip next year, so mark your calendars for that. While in Ghana, I'll meet my dear friend, Ambassador Rob Jackson at the U.S. Embassy in Accra. Rob and I worked together at the American Embassy in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, and where he was the political counselor and I was the refugee coordinator for West Africa. We will explore ways for the U.S. Embassy to assist our work. Here's another glimpse into our work. On September 26th this year, Microsoft and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights held a meeting to launch global standards of conduct for business in tackling discrimination against LGBTI people. Invited organizations included P&B Paribas, Booz Allen, Barclays, the Global Council on Global Equality, the US UN Mission, Deutsche Bank, DuPont, Facebook, Bloomberg, General Electric, Goldman Sachs, Google, Human Rights Campaign, Human Rights First, Human Rights Watch, IKEA, L'Oreal, Marriott, MasterCard, Monsanto, PayPal, the Argentinian UN Mission, the French UN Mission, Reuters, the Rockefeller Foundation, Twitter, the UN, UN Women, UNDP, the UN Foundation, the World Economic Forum, and the UNO. This is actually an abbreviated list to give you some idea of the caliber of organizations at this meeting. What I want you to look at is that we were the only faith-based organization invited to this meeting, which I hope gives you some idea of the status that we hold at the United Nations. We host an intergenerational spring seminar which inspires, informs, and challenges lives every April. In 2018, the topic will be the global refugee crisis. Our work is not fully funded by the UUA, which means this amazing work depends on donor support from people like you. We paid our bills last year and we changed the world. Your support made that happen, and we can continue that work with your support for world-changing work for your Unitarian Universalist UN office. Gillian Sorensen, the wife of the late Ted Sorensen, John F. Kennedy's speechwriter and advisor, often says the UUNO punches far above its weight. We have a lightweight budget and an oversized influence at some of the most important meetings in the world. Nowhere do Unitarian Universalists play such an important role on the world stage at so little cost as we do at the United Nations. We should all be proud to support the 55 years of Unitarian Universalist engagement at the United Nations on the most important issues of our planet. With your support, we'll be around for many more years. And remembering Dharma Master Chen Yen of the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation, let me ask you, what are you going to do to put your faith in action? Thank you.
We'll have an opportunity to engage in conversation with Bruce at 11:30 upstairs in the Bacon Room overlooking the Common. Come on up for a continuation of this important conversation. Gonna lay down my sword and shield is our closing hymn. It's number 162.
If here you have found freedom, take it with you into the world. If you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. Go in peace.